Welcome to Eyes on Books. I'm so glad you're joining us this morning, and I think you're going to enjoy our discussion with author Nancy Horan. Nancy is a best-selling author. Some of you may remember reading her novel, Loving Frank, which came out in 2007. She is well known, and she's taken on this topic right now, which is quite interesting but somewhat troubling. It's the history of the people in Springfield, Illinois, before, during, and after the Civil War. So I think you'll enjoy meeting her. So I'm Elaine Schnitter. My co-host is Steve Savlov, and we're going to tell you a little bit about the story, and then Nancy Horan will join us, and we'll be able to ask her some questions. So glad you're here. Okay, Steve.
I'm happy to talk about this particular book, The House of Lincoln, because I really learned a lot. And here I am, 78 years old, and I took history in high school, but didn't know a lot of the particulars. It takes place in Springfield, Illinois, and follows a family who came from Madeira, Portugal, and they were seeking asylum in the United States because they were Presbyterian, and where they lived, they were accusing the Presbyterians of not being part of them. So they came to the United States, and what's interesting is that you see America through the eyes of immigrants, where they come from a different culture and now they come to the United States. What happens in Springfield, Illinois in 1850 and what's happening in our day are pretty parallel. There was a rush on the Capitol for who supported slavery, and then there was a race riot, which was pretty bloody, and so the interesting thing is how that parallels what's going on today, at least from my point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do think there are a lot of parallels between the House of Lincoln story and what's happening in our current time. The other family, you mentioned the Ferraras, who had immigrated from Portugal because of religious persecution, but the other family the author follows are the Donegans. Mm-hmm. And the Donegans are free blacks. Their mother is white and their father is black. And they had come to Illinois and had papers declaring they were free. Mm-hmm. And they set up businesses. One was a barber, one was a shoemaker, and they were very much part of the community. However, they lived in fear of very harsh laws at that time called the Illinois Black Laws. And the Illinois Black Laws prevented blacks from immigrating into Illinois, even if they were free, and also a lot of penalties for people who helped them or for them themselves. Mm-hmm. But the other thing about the Donegans, which I think was really fascinating, was that they were, at least the one brother, was part of the Underground Railroad system. Mm. And he was getting blacks who had escaped slavery into safe areas. Eventually, they wanted to get to Canada, and they went through Illinois. So that family also was viewing what was happening in the period before and after the Civil War.
Yeah, that's well, the Underground Railroad was important in our history. Mm-hmm. Because it was one way of not openly freeing slaves or moving slaves away from the South. The other thing that's interesting is Illinois had what they call slave catchers, which means that these people were authorized to catch slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this level of fear
Mm-hmm.
that anybody could be a slave catcher.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so.
Now, the other thing about Springfield, which probably we already knew, was that that was where Lincoln lived. So here was the Lincoln family, and they were just trying to survive the politics of slavery and attempting to live somewhat of a normal life among all of these people with various issues. So that was interesting, I think, because we don't always think about what was going on around them while they were living in Springfield.
Right. Well, I typically thought of, the Proclamation of Emancipation, or, Proclamation of Emancipation as a done deal. But just like our politics today, we have a big schism between, people for freedom and who are more liberal, and then you have the conservative, get back to old ways of doing things. So it's really interesting to. I mean, I hadn't put this in perspective like I have now.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, it gives you a whole different view of what was happening during those years. And
Right.
I think it's because the author used these particular families and their experiences. For instance, the daughter of the Portuguese family, her name was Anna, she went to work in the Lincoln house as a house girl when she was 14. So she was privy to a lot of goings on in that house. She also was friendly with a free black girl. Her name was Cal. So Anna experienced what Cal was going through as far as having to be very careful of these, as you mentioned, these slave catchers were all over the place. And they would even catch blacks who were free, and they would destroy their free papers. Because the blacks who had free papers, they would carry them with them at all times. So just in case somebody accused them of being a runaway.
Right. Yeah, that's, well, like I said, it's been a fascinating read, and it brings a whole different perspective on that period of time around around the Civil War and what happened after, and especially the riot in Illinois. And the other thing is I thought of Illinois as kind of a Midwestern neutral state, but it turns out, at least in Springfield, it wasn't. It was, there's all this chaos going on, and so again, it gives me a different perspective on this. Well, on Illinois.
And the results of the Civil War just kept resonating. We were both surprised about that 1908 riot. I don't think we had known about it. It was a race riot, and some white supremacists totally destroyed an entire black
Community.
retail commercial area, homes. People black people lost everything. And the other thing was one of the Donegan brothers who worked for the Underground Railroad, an 84-year-old at that point, was lynched during those riots. The only thing that came out of those riots, which maybe was positive, was the formation of the NAACP.
Right.
It was formed right after the 1908 riots in Springfield. So I guess there was some justification there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when you have tragedy, it opens up the window for,
Yeah.
for new things to happen.
Yeah. Well, I think we've given our listeners a good view of what to expect in our book, The House of Lincoln. And we will be now interviewing Nancy Horan and have a chance to ask her some questions.
Right.
Okay?
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure to welcome back Nancy Horan, a well-known author of several different books. And so we're going to ask you some questions, Nancy.
Okay.
And I'd like to start off with what was it inside of you that got you, driven or motivated to do this book?
Good question. Well, the book takes place in Springfield, Illinois, and I grew up there. I was born and raised there, and I always thought of Lincoln as the great emancipator. People in town respected him enormously and still do. I mean, he's just a fabulous, extraordinary president. He's regularly ranked as the best president. But he came from a very humble beginning, and he adopted Springfield as his hometown. And I was interested in the people around him. So the book is called The House of Lincoln, and it certainly takes place in the house that existed where he lived in Springfield with Mary for 27 years. It takes place in the White House also, but it also is just the world that surrounded him, the thoughts that occurred in his head. His whole world was really the House of Lincoln. He wore a very tall hat, and he would tuck in some notes, his thoughts for that day, and stick them into the band inside his hat. So that hat housed an extraordinary brain. But in any case, I was disturbed when I started in 2014 on this book. I was deeply disturbed by the idea that people were throwing around language indicating that we were so polarized as a nation that we were approaching a civil war. And I decided I wanted to know about the buildup to the actual Civil War. I wanted to learn about it. I wanted to understand what it was like to actually have our country come to the point of a civil war. And that's what motivated me to study Lincoln's surroundings as that 1850s as they heated up.
Right, right.
Nancy, I was wondering, as growing up in Springfield, Illinois, as a young person, were you aware of any local lore having to do with what had happened there before the Civil War, like the Underground Railroad or some of the immigrant experiences that went on?
I would have to say I knew almost nothing about the Underground Railroad. Certainly, as I went to college, I learned about the Underground Railroad. In other places, I didn't really know about it. In Illinois, I learned about it later when it sparked my interest. So, and as for the immigrant experience, I knew about that because my own family were a bunch of Irish immigrants at one point in the 1840s, and I just think that a lot of people from different, different European countries became immigrants to Illinois. They started out on the East Coast and they eventually made it to Illinois. Um, but it was an interesting collection of people, and scholars in recent history have discovered that Lincoln lived in a very diverse neighborhood of Black families, of immigrant families, uh, and of Southern families that had moved north, bringing with them Southern attitudes about slavery. So it was a microcosm of the United States, frankly, the town was. And it happened to have living in it a man who would eventually take on slavery.
That was the interesting part of the book, thinking about him and who he was and what we have in our minds about him, and then learning about what he was surrounded with. So they were trying to, he and his family were trying to deal with the politics of slavery while living in this very diverse community. So I
That's
think
correct.
that it really added another layer to who he was. And I like the fact that you used Anna as a little view into what happened in that house. She wasn't privy to a lot, but she was able to relay some of the little things she had picked up on. And I think the one thing I liked was she described Lincoln as having a great sense of humor, and
Mhm.
he always had something amusing to say.
Right.
So I liked that you did that. That was very, very heartwarming. And then Cal also working there, I think, showed, with the blacks also being employed in that house.
Yes. And
So,
I think so Anna is one of the primary narrators in the story, and Mary Lincoln is another. And also there is a free Black man named Spencer Donegan, who is also a narrator, and he's based on a real person. Anna is an invented character who's based on a group of real immigrants who came to Springfield from Portugal, from Madeira. And then Mary Lincoln is also the third narrator. Um, and I chose Anna as a narrator, the primary narrator, because she needed to be alive, in my view. The book spans 5 decades, starting in the 1850s when Anna is 11 years old, and going to the point after uh, the war, well after Reconstruction. In 1908, Anna would have been 68 years old when she witnesses the 1908 Springfield, Illinois race riot. And it's a profoundly disturbing experience for her because it's a repudiation of everything that they had fought for in the Civil War. And as a child, she has a relationship with a girl named Cal. And Cal is uh, based on a just a mention of a young girl who was involved in the Underground Railroad, helping a man who was an Underground Railroad conductor. And so Cal has her own experience, and it's a different level of experience. She's well aware of slave catchers in town, and she exposes her young friend, Anna, to what's going on, just quite by accident. She doesn't voluntarily make that happen, but they are both witness to the existence of people searching for slaves. And uh, Anna is an innocent kid who starts to learn about race and how it divides people and class and all these things that affect all of us today, even.
Yeah, I was thinking about the uh, the riot against the White House, and this reminded me of um, January 6th
Yes.
and the rush to on the Capitol and um, how how many parallels there are to what happened then, but in different ways. But you think that we would have evolved, by now into
Yeah.
into a more civilized, um, society.
Yeah. You're so right about that. There are many resonant events that happened then, and you can look around and say, oh my gosh, why does this exist? Why is this going on? I mean, we were in the first year of Black Lives Matter, its existence, when I started this book. And, I was thinking, well, why? This is, what have we solved since then, since the Civil War? This is terrible that young men are losing their lives. And uh, so that was all at work for me. But also, then I discovered just remarkable similarities between them then and now. For example, the country was so divided, it was really the minute Lincoln was elected, he started to have threats on his life. And so he had to, in a way, enter Washington very quietly, almost incognito, um, when he went to assume the presidency. And during the vote count, because he won by electoral votes, so there was an electoral vote count in 1860. And there were groups of people who were conspiring to attack the vote count. So it was literally repeated.
Yeah, history repeating itself. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just remarkable to me to discover that fact. I thought we haven't we've come far in some things, but I thought it was good for all of us to know this history, because I didn't get this history in high school. I got some later, but I was really struck by the endemic racism that existed in the North. There were Black laws that prevented African Americans from entering Illinois and staying longer than 10 days. Illinois had the worst Black laws in the North, but there were other states that had them. So this was just something that was never mentioned when we were students, it's fact of life. So I think that really racism was a fact of life then. And Lincoln, when he really protested uh, the spread of slavery, that was like the common denominator, the thing people could agree upon. They didn't really like the fact that there were attempts by Southern sympathizers, in particular Stephen Douglas, with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, really said, well, people who form a new territory and people who form a state out of that territory should be able to just vote for what they want, whether they want their state to be pro-slavery or anti-slavery, a free state or a slave state. And Lincoln saw the writing on the wall about that. That was a dangerous, dangerous precedent. And that's when he said, okay, we're going to fight that. And we're not going to take on the South that has slavery already, but we're going to fight the spread of slavery. And I think what I realized was that Lincoln was limited himself by his own experiences growing up in the North and in the South also. And I think that as he changed, he was able to bring people along to a, a more open viewpoint, eventually getting to a point of declaring the Emancipation Proclamation and having it go into effect on January 1st, 1863, and having people pulling people along who were not comfortable with it. They thought they were fighting for the Union, and suddenly they were fighting against slavery, period. Uh, some people saw that very clearly from the beginning, that that's what the war was about. Some people didn't.
And this has been wonderful
Yeah.
to get your perspective and your thinking behind, writing this book. And thank you so much for writing it.
Yeah,
because,
thank you.
because it gave me a lot of insight that I didn't have before. And I was surprised about, the proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation. You thought it was a done deal,
Yeah.
and even today, they passed laws, and you think it was a done deal, but not everybody agrees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So thank you for enlightening us, and
Yes.
I certainly would recommend your book to anybody who wants to get some insight into those times. So we're going to have to
Wind it up. Yeah.
wind it up.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Appreciate it, Nancy.
My pleasure.
Take
Yeah.
care. Well, thank you all for joining us for this wonderful interview with Nancy Horan. She's a terrific speaker. She wrote this wonderful book, and I hope if you have a chance to read it, you will. It's called The House of Lincoln, and it's a whole history story. However, it's done through the eyes of people, so you feel like you're really there. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again.
We thank you for tuning in to Eyes on Books. And if you have any books that you think might make an interesting discussion or authors who are good speakers, we'd love to hear your suggestions. Contact us at eyesonbooks@yahoo.com and keep watching.